Why do so many people wake up at 3 a.m. and feel like they're not alone? Around the world, across cultures, 3 a.m. has been called the Devil's Hour or the Witching Hour, the time when the veil is thin, when visitors arrive, when the night feels most dangerous. But is it just superstition? Or is there something deeper going on? In old European folklore, there's a time of night when the rules of the world loosen and things not meant for human eyes draw near. This is the witching hour. For some, it began at midnight, the moment the new day was born and the old one died. But others placed its peak closer to 3 a.m., the darkest, most lifeless part of night. In either case, this window was seen as dangerous because it was when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. The first clear written use of the actual phrase witching time of night is in Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 2. Hamlet says,
"Is now the very witching time of night, when churchyards yawn and hell itself breathes out contagion to this world."
This shows that by Shakespeare's day, the idea of a special, uncanny hour at night was already familiar enough that an audience would immediately recognize it. In 16th and 17th century Protestant Europe, the night was not for ordinary people. As the church bells rang midnight, ministers warned that the hours ahead belonged to temptation, spirits, and sin.
The devil himself stalks these streets after dark.
The streets were said to shift after dark. Every shadow suspect, every whisper of wind, a sign of danger. Authorities agreed. City watchmen patrolled with lanterns, and curfews drove people back indoors. To be caught night walking was enough to raise suspicion of crime, or worse, of consorting with the occult. In sermons, ministers blurred the line between superstition and sin, warning that the soul itself was more vulnerable past midnight.
Beware the hours past midnight, when Satan roams and the soul lies weakest before his snares.
People didn't just avoid the hour, they armed themselves against it. Across Europe you find household counter-witchcraft at thresholds and hearths. Witch marks, strange starbursts, looping circles, or daisy wheels were scored into door frames and beams of wood, scratched into stone lintels, even hidden near chimneys where spirits were thought to slip inside. Beneath the hearth, some families buried witch bottles, small clay jars filled with iron nails or bent pins designed to lure a witch's curse inside and lock it there. Salt was poured across doorways and windowsills, a barrier no witch could cross. Mothers whispered protective prayers as they banked the hearth fire, sealing their homes against wandering forces. Prayers and crosses over beds and doors were the explicitly Christian layer on the same protective logic. In the Nordic world, witches and their familiars were blamed for stealing milk at night. Icelandic tradition names the tilberi, or snakur, a witch-made creature sent out in the dark to drain cows and ewes. Scandinavian variants include the milk hare or troll cat. Folklorists have mapped milk-stealing hares and shape-shifting milk thieves across Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. Sailors around the North Sea and Scotland told of wind knots, ropes sold by witches. Untie one knot for a breeze, two for a gale.
Each knot holds a gale.
The motif shows up in English and Scottish lore summaries and reference entries and ties witches to control of night weather. In Scandinavia, troll belief puts large, dangerous beings abroad at night, often turning to stone in sunlight, so their domain is the dark hours. In Iceland, stories of the Huldufolk, or hidden people, are ubiquitous. Modern reportage even records road projects paused or rerouted to avoid elf-haunted rocks, evidence of the lingering sense that certain places come alive at night. Irish tradition makes the banshee a herald of death, heard wailing in the night, often between midnight and cockcrow for particular families. It's one of the clearest auditory omens planted in the small hours in the archipelago's lore. The message was clear. When the old day died and the new one was not yet born, stay inside, bar the doors, and let no one see you abroad. Centuries later, poets and novelists would still call back to this unholy hour as the natural stage for witches, demons, and restless souls. Folklore said that witches gathered at this hour to perform rituals, casting spells, and summoning forces under the cover of night.
Animae tenebrae, exurge.
Farmers whispered that livestock acted strangely past midnight, sensing presences no one else could see. And villagers told stories of hearing knocks on doors, footsteps on cobblestones, or whispers through the walls, always between midnight and 3. Why such fear of the dark? Before electric light, midnight was a time of true silence and vulnerability. Fires burned low, streets were empty, and the night belonged to anyone or anything that moved unseen. Supernatural power was thought to spike because human defenses were at their weakest. So whether it was midnight exactly or closer to 3 o'clock, the witching hour became shorthand for the moment when our world overlapped with something other. A time when the dead could reach out, witches could work their craft, and ordinary people were wise to stay inside, lock the doors, and pray until dawn. In Christianity, the fear of the night found its sharpest edge at 3 a.m. Why that time? Because it's the inversion of 3 p.m., the traditional hour of Christ's death. Believers saw it as a cosmic mockery, mercy at 3 in the afternoon, malice at 3 in the morning. That's why it became known as the Devil's Hour. Not official doctrine, but whispered belief, passed from bedside to bedside. The idea that hell clocks in right when heaven once broke through. And once you've heard it, you never look at the glowing red 3 o'clock on your alarm clock or your phone screen the same way again. But this fear of the deep night wasn't unique to Christianity. In Japan, the clock of fear ticks to a very specific window, the ox hour, roughly 1 to 3 in the morning. And within that, the darkest sliver of all, Ushimitsu Doki, around 2 to 2:30. This was the time when the boundary between our world and the spirit world weakened. Ghost stories, yokai tales, and superstitions all warned, stay inside, because at Ushimitsu Doki, the unseen moves freely. It was also the appointed hour for one of the most chilling rituals in Japanese folklore, Ushi no Koku Mairi. A jealous soul, usually a scorned lover, would creep to a shrine in the dead of night, carrying a straw effigy of their enemy. By candlelight, they'd hammer nails into the doll against a sacred tree, cursing their rival's life with every strike. Legend says the ritual had to be done at Ushimitsu Doki, or it wouldn't work. And if anyone caught you in the act, the curse would rebound on you instead. Kyoto's Kifune Shrine is still tied to these tales. Locals whisper it's where the cursed and the cursed upon crossed paths under the cover of darkness. So just like Europe's witching hour, Japan's ox hour carried the same warning. When the world is asleep, something else is awake, and you don't want it to notice you. Across Latin America and Spain, the night has its own crucible of fear. La Hora Bruja, the witching hour. It stretches from midnight until 3. a labyrinth of silence where shadows seem to beckon. Folklore says it's when witches prepare their victuals for ritual, when spirits slip between worlds, and when the air itself feels heavier. But the clock strikes sharper at 3 a.m. Some call it La Hora del Diablo, the Devil's Hour. In Spanish rural traditions, people believed witches needed to sustain themselves before dawn to continue their Sabbats. The kitchen hearth, usually the safest and most domestic space, became tinged with unease if noises were heard past midnight. Was it just wood settling, or something more sinister? But midnight to 3 was not only about witches. Spirits, ancestors, and wandering souls were said to move most freely in these hours, slipping across thresholds between the living and the dead. Families who kept vigil for the recently deceased often marked this period as the most unsettling, reporting flickering lamps or unexplained knocks, as though the departed were pausing to make themselves known. The sense of dread sharpened around 3 a.m. In Catholic countries, the association was overtly theological. Christ was believed to have died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Good Friday, the hour of mercy and salvation. Folklore inverted that sacred marker. If 3 p.m. was when Christ completed his sacrifice, then 3 a.m. was its demonic mirror. The Devil's Hour was cast as the time when demons mocked Christ's death, prowling at their strongest. In sermons and local tales, being awake at this hour meant leaving yourself vulnerable not just to witches, but to Satan himself. Even more eerie was the fixation on precision. By the modern era, when clocks became common, storytellers narrowed the focus further to 3:33 a.m., half of 666, a numeric parody that seemed to grin at believers from the glowing digits of alarm clocks and church bells alike. In Spanish-language horror films and novels, the detail of 3:33 became shorthand for absolute evil arriving on cue, a superstition amplified by popular culture. It's no accident that Latin American horror stories, from ghostly La Llorona encounters
Ay, mis hijos.
to modern possession tales, are often placed at this liminal time. Midnight to 3 was not just the depth of darkness, but the stage upon which witches, devils, and spirits were all thought to converge. And the advice was simple. If you found yourself awake, don't tempt fate. Stay quiet, don't answer knocks, and above all, keep your eyes closed, because you never know what's waiting in the dark. What's captivating here is how these stories intertwine across cultures. Europe had the witching hour. Japan had Ushimitsu Doki. And in the Spanish-speaking world, La Hora Bruja stitched itself into the intricate mosaic of night fears. All of them reimagined the darkest hours as a time when boundaries don't hold, when the veil is thin, and when unseen forces orchestrate their own mysterious rites. Different lands, different tongues, but the same enigmatic intuition. The deeper the night, the more likely something else is awake. And it's certainly not human. When you line up the stories, a pattern emerges. Different names, different legends, but they all circle the same window of time, midnight to 3, the deepest stretch of night. 4 cultures, 4 sets of myths, and yet one intuition, that in the dead of night, the boundary between us and the other side doesn't just thin, it breaks. It's as if humanity, scattered across continents, came to the same uneasy conclusion. The world is never more vulnerable, never more haunted than in those hours when even time itself feels cursed. Even Britannica hedges its bets. The witching hour might be midnight, or it might be 3. Pick your poison. Catholic sources remind us it isn't doctrine, just folklore, but that almost makes it creepier, like a superstition too old and too stubborn to die. In Japan, they even had a saying for it. Even the trees sleep at Ushimitsu Doki. If the forest itself nods off at that hour, what else might be roaming while the world slumbers? The answer might be closer than you think. Here's the truth. 3 a.m. feels supernatural because your biology is at its lowest flame. Core temp bottoms out in the deep night. Your internal thermostat is scraping the floor, which the brain reads as vulnerability. That chill isn't a ghost. It's your circadian nadir. Meanwhile, melatonin is peaking. Melatonin is a hormone your brain makes when it gets dark. It's like the body's internal nightlight switch. As soon as daylight fades, your pineal gland releases melatonin into your bloodstream. That chemical signal tells your body it's time to rest. You start to feel drowsy, your core temperature drops, and your system shifts towards sleep. The light of night hormone is highest around 2 to 4 a.m., pushing you toward deeper sleep and lower alertness. Groggy, cold, hyper-suggestible. Perfect conditions for a spooky interpretation. Your blood pressure is at its nightly low, then primed for the pre-dawn surge that ramps up between roughly 4 a.m. and noon. That transition can feel like a wave. Thudding heart, uneasy breath, a body that suddenly thinks something's happening. And then there's cortisol, your natural get-up-and-go signal. It starts rising in the early morning hours and then spikes 30 to 60 minutes after you wake. The cortisol awakening response. That pre-dawn lift can make you pop awake at 3 to 4 a.m. with a shot of, "Why am I anxious?" Now zoom into the strangest part of the night, sleep paralysis. You're half awake while your body is still in REM atonia, the safety lock that stops you acting out dreams. Result? You can't move, your chest feels heavy, and the mind often paints an intruder in the room. This hits most often near morning, right when REM is densest. The visitor is physiology wearing a mask. The hour culture's called cursed is the same window your physiology calls off guard. In the deep night, when most of us sleep, some are wide awake and some are terrified. Exorcists, ghost hunters, and believers across history regularly report that 3 a.m. is prime time for disturbances. Exorcism reports often mention intense spiritual attacks around 3 a.m. Paranormal literature refers to it as the demonic hour, a time when the possessed claim worse torment, voices grow louder, apparitions more vivid. Numerous anecdotal reports say people see dark shapes, silhouettes, at around 3 a.m. when everything is still, the house breathing softly, but something else stirring. This isn't just old folklore. Ghosts are most active between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. is a common phrase shared in paranormal circles. Poltergeist activity, electronics glitches, whispers in empty rooms. Modern stories are loaded with these. One Reddit user says their phone screen flicks on around 3 a.m. every night without notifications. No visible culprit, just a cold sense something is wrong. Skeptics push back. They say these events are more about memory, suggestion, sleep cycles, and darkness than demons. The tension between believer and skeptic lives in every whisper at night. Are we hearing footsteps or the house settling? Is that shadow an intruder or just the moon casting shapes? All these accounts, ancient exorcism, modern phone glitch, midnight whispers, paint a picture. 3 a.m. isn't just spooky in myth. It's the hour when imperfect humans become hyper-aware of the imperfect dark. Because whether you believe spirits are real or not, in these hours, the silence gives them room to feel real. So why does the fear stick? Because it's everywhere. Cultures across the world branded the same hours as cursed. Science shows our bodies are at their lowest, most vulnerable point. Layer myth on top of biology, and suddenly 3 a.m. feels wired into us as dangerous. Even skeptics admit there's something uncanny about waking up then. And that's why the idea never dies. The hour has been marked in stories, in rituals, in science, and in our own uneasy awakenings. So the next time you bolt awake at 3 a.m.
What was that?
and swear someone's watching, is it just your brain? Or are the midnight visitors still waiting? Let me know in the comments, do you ever wake up at 3 a.m. for no reason? Do you think it's biology or something darker going on? If you made it this far and are into the dark and strange, I post new videos every week, so subscribe to become a mystic seeker so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.